Good evening, Doug. How are you doing?
Hey, Levant, I'm good. How are you?
Thank you for joining. As this is our very first episode.
First
Hooray!
episode. Exciting
We
to be
made
here.
it.
Exciting to be the first guest on this show.
We
I feel
started.
honored that you invited me on here, and it's
Well,
exciting to be a part of it.
to be honest, working with the creative community, it's really important for us to curate well and find the right people. So it will not be just blah blah, but we want to go into the craft of how do we
Mhm.
create, why do we create, and who is doing this. That's why let's start with your journey from verbal to visual. I think you took a long time to get there, and tell us how you embarked on this great journey.
Yeah. So, my entry point into this world of visual thinking, which is all about, using drawings and diagrams as a thinking and communication tool. As we've talked about, it's kind of a fun, it's in some ways a very kind of niche field to get into, but it's also very broad in its application, since you can use these skills kind of for anything. They're very supportive since they're kind of this core communication and thinking style. I entered this world at a time when I was kind of looking for a new career path. My background is in education. I went to school to become a middle school and high school teacher, and I was substitute teaching at the time because that world didn't quite feel like the perfect fit for me. There's a lot that I love about the world of education. That's like the core of my business. It is education. But that setting of a school environment didn't feel kind of comfortable enough to me. It was stressful for me. It was overwhelming. I burned out kind of on a couple occasions, which is why I didn't jump full time into a kind of teaching position, but instead was substitute teaching. And then, like at the end of a day of subbing, I would go to a coffee shop in Portland, Oregon, is where I was living at the time, and just kind of look around the internet, try to figure out like, okay, what else might I do? Is there some kind of independent thing that maybe would allow me to do a half-time teaching position instead of a full-time teaching position? And I was watching a bunch of TED Talks, and I came across one really short one from Sonny Brown called Doodlers Unite, which was just all about the power of doodling, of making marks. And I think that, like, since I was looking not just for a potential new career path, but also something a little more independent and creative, I latched onto that right away.
You have seen the
Partially
light.
because
Somebody shone the light on your path.
exactly, like a spark of inspiration, be like, oh, I didn't really know that that was a field or like a skill that you could really lean into. That resonated with me in part because I had recognized, after leaving undergraduate school in particular, continuing to read interesting books and like enjoy things that I was learning from books, but then realizing like just a week later or a couple of weeks later, especially a couple of months later, I couldn't really remember much of what I read about in that book that I really enjoyed.
I,
And that
I,
frustrated me as like a lifelong learner, how quickly those ideas kind of drifted away. So my first kind of intention behind developing these skills of sketching out ideas was to better remember kind of what I was reading in books.
so
But it
this
kind
is it,
of,
right?
it blossomed in a bunch of different directions from there.
Imagine the first 20, 30 years of our life we're just taking in, right? We took so much in, and how do you funnel this out? I believe this is it's not something just for teenagers. It's also, when you reach your 30, apparently you reach some kind of a genetic limit of what you could have learned, right? And after that you have to become a teacher, so you have to
Mhm.
also learn how to not just read it, consume it, but also start producing it, writing it. So around the 32, apparently some privileged people who had very good education would start failing, and some other
Hmm.
poorer people, who read a lot and they like educated themselves, they would start shining, because apparently that's when your real genius shows up. So I
Hmm.
believe you are also always looking for this kind of good ideas, the gems, and I think in your craft, that is the essence. How do you actually find it and describe it to the others? Because they say Shakespeare has only 3,000 words, but he did it in
Hmm.
such a way that now the English, funnily enough, we are not able to use all his words in our daily life. But the poet, right, the bard, managed to do actually so much with not so many words, in fact. But how
Yeah.
did you actually say that there is actually a professional interest in it? Where did you
Hmm.
find the courage? Because a lot of people don't have the courage to get out of their routine and where they got stuck. How did you get unstuck with a professional, let's say? Where did you see
Yeah.
the money?
Yeah. Well, so when I was in those coffee shops after a day of substitute teaching, I was watching TED Talks and came across this power of doodling. I also was curious. I know that some people make money online. How do they do that? So I literally Googled how do you make money online? And even this was back in 2011, early 2012, maybe. The internet had been around for a while. So there were people that were building online businesses. It was still kind of new. And thankfully, I came across, you filter out all the kind of spammy advice, the get rich quick schemes. And I came across some, to me, what were helpful articles that it's not going to happen overnight. But if you consistently put good work out there and offer a useful service or training or useful material, you can build a meaningful online business. So kind of the combination of those two things, coming across that TED Talk, wanting to start my own thing and maybe start my own business. The first thing I did is I began building these skills because I wasn't a doodler growing up. I wasn't really an artistic kid. So I came at it as I kind of consider it a learn in public project. I started a website called thegraphicrecorder.com. Having just learned about that phrase, graphic recording, I didn't really fully understand that it was a profession. It is. People who go to events and do big sketches during talks or meetings, those are graphic recorders. It just happened to be that website was available. So I started that website and I just started blogging as I was developing my skills, sharing the activities I was taking on, posting my simple little sketches, summaries of podcasts that I was listening
But you
to.
were not necessarily good at it. You were not naturally doing that. So you actually learned the craft in a way. That's
Yeah,
very
yeah. I documented my process of learning this skill. And I think this might be one of the things that I think is relevant to anybody doing creative work is that, on the one hand, we can feel the pressure when we're sharing our creative work that we want to share the best of what we make. We want to put our best self out there, our best work out there. And while I think striving for good work, for making good work is important, there's also so many benefits that come from simply documenting your creative process, even when it feels rough and not good enough to you. Putting your work out there on a consistent basis is the way that people are going to come to learn about it anyway, learn about it in the first place. So that's kind of what happened with me when I was blogging at the Graphic Recorder. It didn't take too long for someone to reach out and say, hey, that summary you did of that podcast is really cool. How much would you charge to create a sketched summary of my thing?
That's
So that's when I
interesting.
started doing a little bit of freelance work just from people that stumbled across my blog. I think I was posting my work on Twitter. At one point, I remember early on, my biggest, well, it kind of felt like a break. Daniel Pink retweeted. Daniel Pink's a fairly famous author. I recently did a sketch of his book To Sell Is Human. He wrote the book Drive. He wrote the book
Mhm.
When. He's prolific author. He retweeted a sketch summary that I did of one of his interviews, I think with Jim Collins. And that was the first time that I saw my website get 500 visits that day instead of the typical 20 or 30. So just little things like that came because I was posting things regularly. And in those days, posting the images on Twitter so that people could see them. And, there was some social sharing. And that's what led to those initial freelance opportunities.
one of your videos, I talk to everyone I meet these days, essentialism, because it comes up in everything, because people have so much to say and you have so little time. And then when you start talking, I keep thinking, oh, but you have to watch the essentialism video. And they say, what is that? It sounds like a familiar word, but essence, extracting the essence like in perfume, right? The even human nature is supposed to have some essence. That's what the philosophers are trying to extract all the time. I mean, since the beginning of time. The point is, my question to you is, how did you go from, as an educator, from being like a guardian of books, reading? So it's very textual. And actually, that's the interesting part for me. You actually started from a verbal place and you climbed up to the visual mountain, right? Which is
Mhm.
quite a steep mountain. I'm saying this because early on I stopped drawing and I went into like
Mhm.
mathematics, very scientific and let's say reading a lot, but very technical things. And now I'm 55 and I'm thinking, how can I go back to that visual storytelling? Because that's seems to be what we need right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I do kind of consider it to be like this language that we all developed as kids. Like we were natural doodlers
Yes.
from age 2 or 3 to, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 or 9 or 10. For me, it was up until about like second or third grade when kind of drawing became a thing that like only artists did in school. It wasn't something
Exactly.
that everyone did. It was just this became this smaller and smaller like group of people that did it. And you had
Yeah.
to kind of be an artist. It had to look good. It had to look a certain way. Otherwise, you'd maybe get made fun of for the little doodles you do in your notes or whatever the case may be. So in a lot of ways, I consider like the work that I do in the field of education, of helping people come back to this skill set, is just give them opportunities to start making marks that aren't just words,
Mhm.
and share like some structure, some scaffolding to help people kind of re-enter this type of thinking and mark making that isn't familiar or comfortable anymore, but it was at one time. So it's kind of a matter of just like uncovering what you used to do and removing some of those barriers and those fears maybe around it having to look a certain way.
And
Because
how
it
is
can
the
be.
essence extraction works? How is the summarizing?
Mm,
How did you sharpen up that
yeah. Well, one was just through practice, but this might actually be a good time. How about I switch my camera over to like an
yep,
overhead shot and I'll share the way that
go for it.
I think about kind of this work of getting to essence. Um, so the way I think about it these days is a Venn diagram that has 3 parts to it. The first part being like as you're reading a book or listening to a podcast, defining your purpose for engaging with that information is kind of step number 1. You kind of need to know why you're reading it, why you're taking that in. I'm not sure if you're seeing balloons, but I apologize if you saw balloons go across my screen there.
We like we like balloons, no problem.
Upside down too. So after you kind of identify why you're engaging with that piece of information, this is what you do kind of before you start reading or before you listen to that podcast episode. Then, like as you're reading or as you're listening, you collect the pieces. So you pay attention to like what are the individual ideas that are interesting to you that connect to your purpose. You kind of jot those down, and this part doesn't even have to be all that visual. For me, it's often like, oh, I'm just going to do a quick bullet point list. That thing that the author said was interesting. Ooh, this made me think of something in my experience. Oh, I want to learn more about this. You kind of just collect the interesting pieces to you, and then in the third stage of the process, this is where you solve the puzzle. And what you're doing in this stage is, I consider it to be a model that you make that spans somewhere along the spectrum from a diagram that might be a little more word heavy to a drawing that's more visual heavy, that gives you the opportunity to bring those pieces together. This is where like you get to the essence piece. You integrate, where this intersection here is about inquiry as you move from defining your purpose to collecting the pieces. That's a process of inquiry. When you go from collecting the pieces to solving the puzzle, that's an act of integration. And I think it's this integration piece that makes this work super interesting to me. It's not really about collecting facts, or even like, coming up with an icon for one single idea that you hear about. It's more about this piece of integration, bringing the ideas from a whole book into a model that helps you make sense of it, right? And helps you take that information with you and apply it to your life or share it with someone else. And I've found that diagrams, whether it be something like a flow chart or a timeline or a Venn diagram, that's kind of one category of model that you might use to integrate those pieces, or drawings in the form of like visual metaphors, like the iceberg model, which you may be seen before, or kind of choosing any object in the physical world, like the speedometer is another one that I like. Any object in the physical world has certain kind of inherent characteristics to it that you can turn into a metaphor that describes, maybe the pace with which you're doing your work, or living your life, or what to say yes or no to. One of the ways I used this specific visual metaphor before in that essentialism video, tell me if this is looking familiar at any point, Levant. This comes from Derek Sivers. As you're thinking about an opportunity, it's either hell yes, or if it's anything less than that, it's a no. So as you consider where to put your time and energy, a lot of people say yes to anything that maybe crosses this threshold, but that's how you become overwhelmed and overworked if you say yes to everything, which is why whenever possible, only say yes if it's a hell yes, everything else is a no. So that's one little example there. But this to me is kind of the most interesting part of the process, where you it's about integrating these pieces into a model that kind of like describes the system of that book or of that conversation you listen to. And then to round this out, I'll mention this last intersection here. After you come up with that model that helps you make sense of some collection of information, then you swing back and revisit your purpose, and you consider, did that model that I created, did that kind of have the impact that I set out with? Did it kind of meet the intent behind my engagement with this information in the first place? And if not, you can kind of rework it. You can re-sketch out as many times as you need anything that you're working with. That's why I, don't take an overly illustrative approach to my work. It's really rough. It's really sketchy, because I want to be able to like re-sketch it out whenever I need to. So that's kind of how I think about the process of getting to essence with any collection of information. It's not, you don't get there right away. There's kind of this boiling down, and it's a personalized boiling down because it's based on what you want to get out of it, not necessarily what the author wants you to get out of it. It's this boiling down and personalization until you get to some sort of a model that helps you make sense of that piece of information.
There's so much I have to comment on this. Maybe we can go back to it.
Yeah, you want me to pull it back up?
Basically,
And then,
oh no, probably this is not the best way. So, okay, doesn't matter. Let's move to our faces.
yeah.
Basically, you use this word in your on your website about sketching the instinct. But while you are drawing all this, I'm using the word intuition because I think drawing is a way of exploring, right? And you could actually, in a way, your brain is making connections and you're jumping from one idea to another, and you are in the process of browsing and making choices. Not maybe life-changing changes, it's life-changing, but it's actually idea changing or mind shifting. So basically, this is where when you're reading a powerful text, it starts actually massaging your model, and maybe it even forces you to change it, or even better, find some dark corners in your mind that actually you forgot that they were there, an idea that you
Yeah.
heard before. So you could somehow
Mm.
not only inquiry, because that would be a direct method, but indirectly you can also discover what David Lynch is saying, the catching the big fish down below in that deep subconscious that you may not every day let's say brought to light. And actually the authors are very good at maybe navigating through these mental models. Obviously we have some people who are writing exactly about how the mind works, how intelligence is structured, how you can be creative, how you can get unstuck, right, if you're stuck. So basically in a way it's a very good tool for exploring your own mind, your own consciousness, your own mental model, right?
Yeah.
The thing is, usually intuition, we can say that there are things that are in us that unknown to us, right? We can actually find things that we didn't really know about ourselves, or motivate ourselves to think in this direction. So intuition, insight, instinct, these are all I words. It seems to be a good collection.
I like it.
I believe in that sense, the intelligence, in a way, that leads to making decisions has to draw from all these sources. But I think visualization also is very useful because it helps you put on the board, right? Because you could have so much to navigate, you can get lost. You need a map, right? And you use also other techniques, other tools like mind mapping.
Yeah, yeah. Often, I mentioned in that like collection the pieces stage, bullet point lists is one of my go-tos when I'm first capturing information. I would say another go-to is a mind map where you just put a question or a topic in the middle of the page, and then you branch out from there. And having a big piece of paper is really useful for that. This is often too where I might turn to a digital tool like Concepts, for example, is an infinite canvas app. I sometimes use an iPad and a stylus for my work, and having an infinite canvas to work with so that you can kind of follow any thread that excites you as far as you want to take it, and then kind of come back to that center idea and maybe explore a different angle on it. It's a cool, flexible way to kind of feel into. I really like how you talked about intuition and insight, because some of this is about kind of feeling into the ideas and giving your body and your brain kind of the time and space to explore those networks that aren't quite fully in your immediate consciousness yet, but they're kind of getting there. So for them to be able to bubble up and then capture them in the form of a mind map is a really great exercise for a starting point when you're exploring something.
The thing
like
is that I think we also try to go to those inspirations to find new things that we didn't consider, to increase our choices, right? But maybe we also need to force ourselves to do this kind of exercise to change our mind. I think people don't pay enough attention to the need to change your mind. I think there's a couple of people who wrote books about this. I think on Netflix
Mm,
there is something about drugs as well. It seems some people also try that. But this, I'm not talking about hallucinations. More, I'm talking about knowing yourself, knowing your story, but then you are bored with your story. Maybe you're not living such an exciting life, and reading about, watching a Marvel movie, and then you feel like being a superhero and you want to actually do really great things. Well, maybe creation, right? Whether it's a drawing or a painting, even just using more colors than just black and white, right? Maybe it gives you actually something childish, some joy. We can also take joy in
yeah,
this, right? But I
yeah.
see that you are really attached to your pen now. Was it always like that, or is it? It
Uh,
becomes also a thinking, like you said, visual thinking for you is actually a way of. The thing is, I want you to talk about the part where we repeat a loop, like we repeat a cycle, and then we
mm,
want to change our mind. And I believe even drawing that and just making an alternative route and say, oh, but what is there? Like exploring this thing called the territory, right? We are a territory. Our mind is a territory. Maybe go to places we have never been. Do you have this kind of exploration into the unknown in your drawings?
yeah, for me, I think that's a result of creating this external reference that you can essentially have a conversation with. That's one way that I like enjoy describing what it is that visual thinking allows you to do. You talked about, and I think at some point we referenced the limitations of like just thinking through an idea or feeling through it, because you can only do so much with your own thoughts. Your working memory is limited, right? The number of things you can keep in your mind at once. So part of the role of visual thinking is this act of cognitive offloading. It's kind of the scientific term for it. You put some of that information somewhere else that becomes like an extension of your brain, but it also becomes something that you can kind of have a back and forth with, which for me is the type of thing that then points towards those alternative pathways, in the same way that if you had like an open, honest conversation with someone who had completely different political views as you or lived in a different part of the world as you're getting a little bit of a different perspective from that person. With visual
A
thinking,
mirror.
even though it's
I
all
call it a mirror.
you,
A mirror.
yeah, yeah,
They-
they're like once you see it externalized, even if we take that mind map as an example, you as you're brainstorming like different aspects of this topic, you might realize, oh, I've never explored like this angle on it. I've never really thought about like the why behind my interest in like keeping it just one marker, like black and white, why I don't use color. Like maybe I'll explore that pathway. So that's where I think some of that
a-
the
Actually,
the choice of
modeling.
path to go down and the identification of a new path is really interesting. Even when you're just working with yourself, or especially when you're reading a book or listening to a podcast, some concept will come up that you hadn't heard of, or some question that you hadn't explored. Every one of those is an opportunity to like, explore that and like see where it takes you.
In our relation to somebody else's model, right? We are. I always say we are very good monkeys, right? We are very advanced, sophisticated, also idiot, but monkeys. What do I mean by that? Is that when we see someone talking, I think there is a mechanism in our head that starts repeating it. And there's
Mm,
some scientists even say this comes from empathy and love. Apparently in the brain there's this place where it says if you like something, you start imitating it. But then there's also this voice who says, "Oh, no, 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 I don't agree with that, I don't agree with that." So in a way, as we are following somebody else's work, somebody else's model, or even when we are thinking about our own, we need a tool to actually reflect and see. I think visual also gives dominance, dominantly favors the eye, right? So it's a visual eye that makes the not the decisions but the choices, navigational choices. And then do you have this kind of a voice in your head that kind of says, no, no, don't go there, stay on this path, or stick, or you have to insist that we could also be wandering off the topic, right? This happens to me a lot when other people are talking and I already know what they're going to say. Well, I stop listening because I seen where this is going, and then my mind starts going off in its own direction. Maybe these visual pathways can also help us stay on topic, collaborate. I think you made the connection from individual drawing to jumping to the team level collaboration. How does that work if in a group, when there are many models, let's say?
Yeah. Yeah. So one way that that can work, I might just go back to sharing my screen here, is, what we're doing right now. We're having a face-to-face conversation. But then what I've been doing is capturing, I shared this initial model that I have about what it looks like to go through the process of creating a visual artifact. But as you've been chatting, I've just been jotting down interesting phrases, like around intuition and insight, what it means to change your mind, repeating someone versus engaging with those ideas. So from a collaborative standpoint, having like one or both people sketch out the conversation so that you have a reference that you can each point to. And even just to, there's this concept of looping that comes from the book High Conflict by Amanda Ripley. It's a book that I just finished reading that has to do with like one way to engage in healthy conflict is as you're having a conversation with someone, once they say a thing, you repeat it back, not to say that you agree with it, but just to ensure your understanding of what that person just said, and giving that person the opportunity to refine it, and giving you the opportunity to actually make sure you kind of have their perspective more or less correct before you maybe engage and share your perspective. And like having this third thing, 3-point communication is one way that I've heard this described. You have the back and forth of your spoken communication, but then there's also a back and forth with the visual artifact that, in this case, I am the one creating it. But if we were in a room together, I could be over here, you could be right here, and we could be building out this model together, which I think is a really interesting possibility and opportunity for folks that do work together to kind of make meaning together through the creation of a shared visual artifact. So that's just kind of some of what is coming up for me here.
Yeah.
Where do you want to take it from there, Levant?
It makes total sense, but it's not just a visualization, but it's also, you said communication, but actually we also bring it to a relationship, right? So imagine the style of communication. If your boss is around, they will come and just dictate things, and basically they will set the model a little bit in a hard way, and then you're expected to interact with it. You're expected to maybe change it, challenge it. I think when it's visual, it's a little bit easier to, instead of using verbal challenging, because this can be kind of offensive. We could just say, okay, I'm adding something to your drawing. But it's unfortunate that we don't use them enough. Actually, there are some facilitators, especially in the organizational context. We work with a lot of coaches, but basically what they do is they try to find consensus around these things. Obviously, here the consensus, collaboration, C words are more important when you're in a group. But I was also mostly interested in in the case where there's a dominant model. So if you're reading, I don't know, if you're reading Marx, right, you're reading ideology. So there's a whole research that went into it. Or if you're reading if you're reading Simon Sinek, start with why. You're reading in a way, it's a bit of a like profit, right? You're actually up against bigger authority. And the voice, again, I think should be always not only reasoning, but thinking, is that right? Should I accept this? So not just a metaphor, but even this can become like, imagine you're in the church and there's a sermon. Well, I think you're in a position to accept almost 80-90% of what is said, but the 10% where you say, oh, that's not me, right? So it can also be
Mhm.
the final I is the identity. It can help you actually develop the identity around, let's call it a picture or a diagram of your ego and how it goes,
Mm.
externalizes, sends the signal to the outside and say, that's what I meant. But then
Yeah.
also receive and internalize what the other person is saying. The three diagram you mentioned.
This I love this conversation. There's a lot, it connects in a lot of ways to an event that I hosted yesterday. One of the things I'm doing throughout 2025 is a book club within Verbal to Visual, kind of my online learning community about visual thinking. Each quarter, we're picking a couple of books to read, and we're reading them together and we're sketching them together. So the goal is to kind of create maybe a visual summary of a book over the course of a couple months. And we have some live events that kind of support that. In yesterday's event, it was kind of the kickoff for the first round of this book club. And one of the interesting dynamics that came up was around, when you're reading a good book, getting to thinking about that first stage of defining your purpose. Is your goal when reading and sketching to more or less accurately represent the author's model of the topic? Or is it for you to refine and develop your own model that may
Yep.
include aspects of what the author
Yep.
contributed, but where you're maybe listening just as much to your own thoughts and feelings about the topic, and you choose to capture? This is what you kind of have the opportunity to do, even while you're reading and underlining and making notes in the margins. You can have, that's where you can start the conversation with the author, and you can make sure to like get your own intuitions and thoughts and reflections down, so that what you create isn't just like a representation of that author's view, but it's more about the conversation you have with that author and the way you've refined your own model around that topic, that is based just as much on your own experience and insight and intuition as it is the author's. So that's where there's flexibility in this meaning making. You can bring in as much of your voice, of your perspective as you want. Other times you might just want to like, oh,
Yep.
uh,
We
I want
want
to, before I put my voice on it, I just want to fully understand where this person's coming from. So maybe my first pass is just to represent their model. And then maybe I'll do another pass where I dissect the model, or like, share my critique of it, or whatever the case
Yep.
may be.
Well, another I word is inspiration, and I think books are not the only one. There's also
Oh, for sure.
films, watching. I mean, a lot of people refer to Netflix these days.
Mhm.
It could
Watching a
be
creative stream conversation on YouTube or LinkedIn,
exactly the
conversation
only
between two people talking about interesting things together.
conversations are at the essence, of course, but we kind of now use the media much more than meeting people. But there's also the museum, and you know what, there's even the nature. If you just go
Oh yeah.
outside and if you start observing how the season is changing, how the stars are aligning. Right now we have the planets, apparently all of them in one place. So
Mm.
you're thinking, what are the implications of this? What happens if all the planets fall from the sky? And you start imagining, and I believe this is where all these artifacts, all these idea collecting vessels help us basically use our imagination, and we are in the process of creating images, right?
Mm.
Actually, logos, logo, meaning, image, these are actually all the same things. So finally, it's right here that we start painting and drawing. And I wanted to ask you, because book club is very interesting, and actually we want to also do something called the inspiration club, to go
Mm.
a little bit more than just, let's say, the book is it's not limited, I don't mean that, but I mean it's one format, right? But there are many
Right.
other sources of extracting those reflections. In terms of let's not focus only on the general group of readers and thinkers, but professionals. Imagine it could be, let's say, all of us should be lifelong learners, right? We never stop learning in a way, but to extract something out of each thing that we learn and make a diagram. What would be the, designers are using Figma. I use like 5-6 different sorts of brain mapping and diagram tools. Creative people like yours, iPad, drawing. What are your tools basically to exercise this extraction craft?
Yeah, like the physical tools that I use.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I tend to keep it pretty simple. I do enjoy having just kind of one writing tool. I think about creative constraints a lot. And one of the constraints that I almost always lean into is just black and white. So like one marker choice.
And a book, paper basically.
And a book, yeah. What's fun about, even within that constraint of like, okay, I'm not going to bring in different colors or highlighters or anything like that. But even just with this, the constraint of like one mark making tool, one place to make marks on, I use scale quite a bit. So what I was sketching out for the camera here was a fairly like large poster paper that's on my desk that's working fairly large scale, and you can get more of your body involved. And I have these like large Post-it notes back there that you can put up on the wall and move around the space.
I'm sure you hate A4 as a format. A4 is not enough.
So what I do like, so that's my like large scale tools, which I enjoy. I also have notebooks that are more or less A4, maybe a little bit bigger than A4. But there's that, I consider that to be kind of the medium scale, the notebook that you can fit in your backpack and take everywhere on your walk out in nature, so that maybe partway through your walk, you sit down and just sketch out what you've been thinking about. You kind of need that format. That's a good form factor for that experience. And then the smaller scale is like the index cards and the Post-it notes that have this modularity to them, so that when you're collecting the pieces, as I describe it, you have the opportunity to move those around and group them in different ways.
Sticky notes. How about sticky notes? That could also be.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Some
have
people
those up
write
on the wall and move around.
Exactly. Well, in a lot of group, let's say, activities, we actually use sticky notes, just at least to collect ideas. Everybody has a little space where they can actually pick and really write down one idea, and then we try to physically collect them together, group them, and we try to make connections between them. So at the end of the day, this puzzle of concepts, ideas, words, visual, actually, in a way, you are using words as almost like a hub of meaning, and where you need to connect them to different things, and that creates the whole puzzle. But we just need to be a little bit better in identifying the bigger words, eliminate the little guys and come up with some of your diagrams are amazing, because you just read 200 pages of a book, and then one diagram actually just to capture the core concept, right?
Yeah. And I do think there's something to be said, like something that spoke to me about kind of your previous question of maybe capturing insights or learnings that you have, that professionals and creatives have as they go through life. I think a key component of that, whether it's like specifically visual note-taking or some other creative capture, I think what's more important is taking the time to do that little bit of reflection and capturing of that insight, that moment, to be kind of this little, in some ways, a memory that you can look back on that points to that insight that you had in that place and time through that particular experience. Because that then becomes, when you find a way to do that in your format, you're building these little, I don't know, it's like an archive of key moments, key insights
memory.
that
Yeah,
can,
it's
that can
I'm much.
serve as inspiration.
I have always been. I mean, I read books. I read entire libraries of books, but basically, I'm really into movies, and my one of my favorites is Blade Runner. So in the
Mm.
second Blade Runner, actually, the name of the main guy is K. His
Mm.
name is actually K, and that actually represents knowledge and memory. And he's stuck with
Huh.
this memory of a little toy, and he thinks, but he knows that he's an android, but he also knows that I have this memory, and maybe
Mm.
I was a real human. So the memory actually kind of makes him think that he has a soul. In the first movie, it was a unicorn in the image in the dreams, but in the second one, is he represents basically that to be human, we have to remember, right? So
Mm.
remembering is very important. Well, basically, if imagine if your mind was erased, your memory was erased, you would forget who you were, right?
Right.
Um,
What's
but
interesting too is that like forgetting is also a big part of being human, right? We don't hold on to everything, and almost it could be a burden if we did like remember everything and had to pull all that. So it's interesting that with like part of the way I see this visual thinking work is you get to be somewhat selective about what you choose to remember, what you intentionally remember as a way of informing how you move through the world in the future. Some
yeah,
things that you go through, some experiences, like you're going to remember because they had enough like emotionality to them, or they were just impactful enough in your life that you're going to remember those things, whether you take notes on them or not. But some things you can kind of encourage to remain in your memory by doing something creative with them, capturing them in some sort of a way. That's how you can kind of increase the chances of that
totally agree,
thing, that
because
moment, that insight informing your
basically becoming wiser, right? In a way, making choices
wisdom.
between what you want to remember and what you want to forget. And strangely enough, two guys, scientists, they won the Nobel Prize with their research in the brain. They found actually that during dreaming, we are just deleting the hard drive. Basically, you're just basically
Yeah.
dreaming is the process of looking
Yeah.
at your hard drive and say, well, a lot of strange things happened today. I cannot make any sense of it. And 2 days later, you will remember almost nothing from it. But so many, because there's just too much information. So I
Right.
think it's probably the same even with our education. So finally, what we become, right? The choices that we made in terms of profession, what we read, what entertainment we follow.
Mm.
At the end, these are all choices of, in a way, we are brainwashing all the time. Our auto wash, washing our
Yeah.
brain and say, "Hey, I want to remember that. I want to remember that song because there was some meaning in it, and it attached me to a certain moment and the emotion of it." The tricky part, I think, is not being able to forget. That's where I think a lot of sorrow comes as well, right?
Mm. Hmm. Yeah.
So
And what this is bringing up for me too is like there are so many different ways of processing
yep,
information. And we've been talking about, or at least what I constantly think about is this process of externalizing key information with the creation of a visual artifact. But there's also like so much internalization of
yep,
memories, especially like traumatic memories. This is where the book, like The Body Keeps the Score, comes in. We hold a lot of memories and approaches, responses to life in our body. And it's been interesting. I feel like over the past decade or so, I've done more to live just up in here. Yes, be a thinker, but also be a feeler, like feeling into your body and paying attention to like how your body is processing something, or even how your body is reacting to the film you're watching, or the conversation you're having, or the book you're reading. There's a lot of insight that can come from turning your attention Like there's so many places we could place our attention as human beings in any given moment. And it's interesting to experiment with where you place that attention, whether it
Yeah.
be on your thoughts, on like your emotions, your body sensations, on someone else's reactions.
But those are the most difficult things to put on a diagram, right? So basically, we probably need to wait for someone who's very good at expressing those in words, and then translate from that translation, and then come up with.
Yeah,
We have only 10
I think
minutes
the
left.
way the way I'll say it, the way I kind of tend to use like my body's reaction is more just a signal that like there's something interesting going on with whatever I'm reading or watching. So I don't necessarily try to express in a sketch what I'm feeling. It's more like that's what helps me filter and decide what to capture in the first place is often my emotional reaction to it. If I have an emotional reaction, that's a reason to maybe explore the idea on the page in some way.
There are some books while you are reading, the book is telling you stop reading and go outside and enjoy life. You could, in a way, it's a way you are receiving a signal from another individual which managed to write their diagram, their model in a universal way, so that it came to your door. For that book to make it to the bookstore, it has to go through a lot of selection process. So I hope it is not just a bestseller for the season, but it's well, it's true that most of the books that are being published right now, I don't think they will be remembered as classics, but for someone who's really into those, we have to be, I think, really selective. So I wanted to ask you, especially in the visualization art, can you give us a few books that you really had the pleasure drawing and saying, wow, this is really illuminating recently?
That's a good question. So books not necessarily about visual thinking, but books that I have particularly enjoyed visualizing myself.
Yes.
Well, there's one that kind of actually gets at both worlds that I reference all the time. It's called The Extended Mind by Annie Murphy Paul. And it actually it speaks to just about everything we've talked about in our conversation today, because it's about how we think outside of the brain, including things like getting out into nature, listening to your body, making external marks, using other spaces and other people. And what I enjoyed about the visualization that I created for that one is there are kind of 9 ways in which we think outside of the brain that were broken down into 3 different types of cognition: embodied cognition, situated cognition, and social cognition. So with other people. And the way I sketched that out, I did a little sketch of the author, Annie Murphy Paul. And then are you familiar with Inspector Gadget? It was a show here in the United States. Like he has all these tools that pop out of his body. I did that kind of out of Annie Murphy Paul's brain, these kind of mechanical extensions that kind of represented, one of them was a hand for embodied cognition. One of them was a compass for situated cognition. And one was
you should
telephone,
try,
I think, social.
You should try Marvin Minsky's book, The Society of the Mind.
Okay. Yeah, what's the gist of that book?
Well, I think he basically invented artificial intelligence. So and also I love the works of Hofstadter, if you know him, the Gödel, Escher, and Bach.
Heard of it. Yeah, have not read it, but
well, basically, if you start doing a diagram of this, I would love to join you and observe, and maybe we should do a collaborative, because his idea is that mathematics, music, and sketching, because Escher is not exactly a painter. Escher is one of my favorite artists. In a way, what they're doing is basically, Hofstadter says that they are using the same language, and he's trying to also write his book like one of those Escher diagrams. Its story goes inside another story, and in the story there's another story, like 1001 Night Stories. A new story is introduced at the end of every story. So,
Huh.
it's a never-ending story.
Yeah. And I feel like a thing that comes out of a conversation like this, or reading a book, is that you identify like, now there are like 3 or 4 or 5 more books I want to go read next. And that's the only
Definitely,
downside of life sometimes, is
definitely.
that like, you don't have the time to dig into every single book or film, meet every single person that you want to meet and have a conversation with. But
And how
might as well
can our
use the time that you do have intentionally and be like, okay, I'm gonna read every day. I'm gonna sketch a bit every day. I'm gonna
no,
try to have a good
there is
conversation
no
every
end
day. And
to it's a whole universe of minds that are basically books are ways of connecting minds, right? And how can
across
our
time and space, which
uh,
is really so powerful.
yeah, how can our audience find you, reach out to you in the maybe next few minutes? Maybe we can talk about. I know that your website you are using a lot. That's a starting point, right?
Yeah.
But most of your work is actually on your YouTube channel. I'm just sharing it here. So they can just search for verbal to usual. That must be very easy to find. Are you also planning to maybe write some workbooks, some
I
book?
am. Yeah, I do have. Let me get it real quick. I have. So first of all, yes. Check out the website. That's kind of the hub for everything. YouTube is a great place to go, because that's where, I mean, especially right now, kind of starting this year, I've made made the creation of videos a priority, and I try to, almost daily make a new video. Usually ends up being 3 to 5 per week, but I'm just really enjoying the kind of overhead cam only sketched video format and exploring like one new idea each day. So I encourage folks to check out the YouTube channel and see if you like that. This is a workbook that I made. This was actually the first educational resource that I made for people. If it ever focuses, we'll see.
Yes.
For folks building their skills. So this is the Verbal to Visual Notebook. It's like a set of activities. It's a workbook. So it's not really instructional, but it is like, if you complete all of these activities, you will definitely like ramp up your
It's like a
mark making
coloring.
skills.
It's like a coloring book where you can do exercises.
Yeah. And there's a lot of, I try to have a lot of variety in the type of activities that I encourage. Sometimes like getting you out into nature, or interacting with others, or interacting with a book, or interacting with your past. So this is a workbook I encourage folks to check out. And I am currently, I'm also working on more of like a full-fledged how-to book. Over the next handful of years, I hope to do a lot more writing and publishing of my own books, because that is a format. I've done over the past decade. I've made a bunch of online courses that people can find at the site.
Obviously.
I've hosted a bunch of community events, but I haven't leaned in to writing and publishing books. But that's kind of the next stage of my creative work, is leaning into that format, and hopefully trying to write some good books that are useful.
Basically, this first episode, I'm starting with a bunch of other people who are also involved, the Creative Institute. And basically, we think that, I think that next 10 years, people will have to rediscover and develop themselves in creative ways. I think this will become very important. So we need all the guidance we can get. We need all the, let's say, inspiration from, let me say, common folks. You can just actually, if you set your mind to it, you can really explore so much of it. I'm not talking about saving the real creative artist people. I'm talking about using creativity, bringing from the creatives to everybody else, ways of, and I want to make this very strong connection between happiness, creativity, and happiness.
Mhm.
So there is actually, I think there's quite a few things like this kind. Your workbook remind me of this. I think there's a action calendar or something like that, or like happiness calendar, where it gives you every day something different to do, so that you could actually not forget to exercise those things that can make you happy. Uh, so we will try to organize workshops, and maybe we can do a catch up, follow up session with you in the near future. I really enjoy talking to you, and for me, I just discovered you like a week ago, and I'm very happy that very quickly we connected. But I want to also bring to Bulgaria. We are based in Bulgaria. People like yourself to maybe for a big conference. Do you also
Cool.
travel, go out of your Pacific time zone?
I haven't recently, but I'm open to it for sure.
Sounds good.
Might be challenging over the next couple years. I've got 3-year-old twin boys, so the parenting load is pretty heavy right now. But I do like the idea of traveling and connecting with people in person around this skill set, and have conversations like these, or even more interactive workshop type experiences. In person is a goal of mine, again, for kind of the next stage of my work, for sure.
I mean, this creative stream is really to connect to everyone out there in the world. I believe I will make it my duty to really write down names and skills and what you have to offer, and find similar people who are doing similar things. There was we are also organizing Pechakcha events, if you know what it is. Basically for designers and architects and creative community. Next Friday, actually, we have a session. You may also one day just do one of those 20 images presentations, join online virtually. So
that could be interesting. I've never done that format, and I like, again, creative constraints. That's a really cool creative constraint to work with.
It's quite interesting because the concept of Pechakcha is to cut the blah blah and use the visual image. So basically, it forces you to be a visual storyteller for 6 minutes. And if you really have something important to say, it's very hard to fit it in. I don't know why it's so difficult. Maybe we read so much that we cannot make statements. That's why I think some politicians, they're who I'm talking about, they just say something and then the entire world changes. Like, whoa, what did he say? It's because
don't assume that what came out of his mouth was well thought out before it did.
This is we are going to debate that for another decade. But if somebody start saying let's build walls, it's the same thing as let's free people. It's like freedom and the opposite of apparently is quite popular. I mean, that's why my main thesis, and I'm going to try to share it with the audience on next Friday, is we are going towards idiocracy. So that's another movie that I'm inspired by. Is let's not, let's stay intelligent, let's stay smart, but how can an individual cannot solve that puzzle. So I think the smart people should connect, and I think are like those little LED lights, when you put thousands of them together, I think it can also create a better this is how we should use the social media. It should be a place of enlightenment. That's all I'm going to say for tonight.
I agree. And I think as you were describing, what the audience for this show, and thinking about the role that creative skills are going to play in the future for us as individuals, a key part of stepping into that future as an individual is having a community of people that are going through something similar. And I think that's what you're creating with this show, and like literal community. You're building that community as a resource for folks. And I think that's really cool.
90% of the people need guidance, need wisdom, needs inspiration. So I need to connect to those 10% and say, let's help the other 90%. So this is another topic from Ayn Rand. She wrote this book For the Intellectuals, and basically she says Attila the Brute works together with the witch doctor, and the two of them will dominate the producers, because the intellectuals wouldn't help them, you see. So we have a bit of a responsibility to gather as many smart people as we can together and somehow broadcast that, not some TikTok fail idiot moments of life, but actually smarter parts of our minds where we can actually, you gave me 1 hour of your life, so I truly appreciate this, and I take it, and I will try to share it with as many people as we can. This is why this is, I think, a good use of media.
Oh yeah, I agree, and I enjoyed and appreciated our conversation as well. Every time, even though this is like a field that I think about every day, each new conversation that I have with someone, sheds light on a different aspect of it, or get to think about it in a slightly different way or from someone else's perspective. So I have enjoyed and benefited from our conversation too. So thanks for setting it up.
My pleasure. So we're going to end here with a shaking hands, if I can do that.
Okay, great to chat with you.
We need those digital gloves to actually shake hands.
Yeah.
I think this will come
even what
soon.
you just did, like, I felt that, right? I think that's a cool, if you hadn't already planned on signing off all of your conversations in that way, I encourage you to do it.
I
That
will
was
make
a cool
sure
experience.
I do that, because I think this is not just two minds, but like you said, in a way, we also, it is as if you came to my house and we were together for 1 hour. I'm really grateful, and I hope we will do this again. Thank you so much. And I'm pretty sure, at least there, I see some comments. Thank you so much, Wes.
For saying hi.
Thank you. We shake hands with you as well, Wes. Thank you.
Thanks,
Have a
Lavon.
great
Great
evening,
chatting with
and
you.
take care of your twins. When they grow up, you will bring them to Bulgaria.
Would love to. Oh my gosh. Can't wait. We'll come visit. We'll crash at your house.
For sure. With pleasure.
All right.
Doug.
Thanks,
Thank you
Lavon.
so much. Bye-bye. Let's see how we can do the outro. Please stay online when your upload finishes. Take care. Bye-bye.